Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Thank you for testifying. I appreciate your coming before this committee. Dr. Murray, in your testimony, you came to the conclusion that part of the solution for the many challenges we face is likely to be less political and rather cultural. Could you elaborate on this point and in particular give your opinion of the importance of strong families and faith and community life towards improving social capital?
I'm basically going to second what Bob Putnam said earlier, that if we'd gathered people together 20 years ago on issues such as, is religion really important to social capital? Is the family, the traditional family, really important? There would have been a huge divide, depending on the political predilections of the people we're talking about. We have made progress on those fronts. And so now I am not speaking as a person of faith. I'm an agnostic, actually, although I'm wavering in my unbelief. And I am, have been divorced. So in all of those ways, I'm not speaking as a true believer in the institutions of family and faith. I am speaking as a social scientist, as Robert Putnam is, saying this thing called social capital is absolutely crucial to the way that a free society works. It's been the signature of American exceptionalism, actually, from the time of Tocqueville on through the rest of the 19th century and into the 20th century. The way that American communities worked was different from the way communities worked anywhere else in the world, and the reasons we behave differently are captured in social capital as Robert Putnam has described it. And that is going down the tubes. And it's going down the tubes in large part, not entirely, but in large part because the institutions of family and of faith have deteriorated. So once again, I've stated the problem. The progress consists of the much greater consensus that we have now than we had before. That doesn't get us any closer to a solution with one glimmer of hope. The United States has had at least 3 and maybe 4 religious Great Awakenings, depending on which historian you read. And they had enormous consequences. There was one in the 18th century, there were 2 in the 19th century, maybe 1 in the 1970s. They had enormous consequences for the polity as a whole, and they also came out of nowhere. They coalesced, they had enormous impact, and you really couldn't see it coming. In a way, the civil rights movement reflects the same kind of phenomenon, where the civil rights movement really got going in the mid-1950s, and by 1964 we had the Civil Rights Act. So, if the United States has been able to turn culturally on a dime, when the people sensed that things had gone badly wrong before, it is not inconceivable to me that it will do so again. And I can go no further in being helpful about how that might happen.
Dr. Putnam, would you care to elaborate or amplify on any of those themes?
No, as we have said repeatedly, with respect to the importance of communities of faith and families, I think there's broad consensus among the experts. There's not broad consensus about why the problem has happened. That is, there are different views, even probably among us, about exactly why the family has collapsed and exactly why people have turned away from communities of faith. But and also, I think probably we would all agree, it's not just those 2 institutions. Those are ones that Charles has emphasized, and I agree with that, but it's also true of Rotary clubs and all, bowling leagues and many, many other examples of social capital. If I may, Senator, I'd like to piggyback on some comments that other people have made that I agree with, actually. I do think that this problem, if we reverse engineer, if it's 2020 and we've begun to turn this around, the first signs will be at the state and local level around America. That's where America has in the past fixed its problems. And it involved, and including exactly the period of the turn of the 19th to the 20th century, when there was another great religious fervor during that period. But not only that, it was also the period when labor unions got started. It was a period when most service organizations, Kiwanis and Rotary, and keep going on. It was a period in which there were grassroots solutions to problems very much like the ones we face now. I give it as one example. In response to the growing class gap then, in 1910, Americans in small towns in the heartland invented the high school. The high school, that is free education for everybody in town, all kids in town, was not invented by God. Or if God did it, this is how he did it. In small rural towns, actually, rich folks who had already sent their kids to private secondary education, boarding schools or something, became convinced that other people's kids should also have the access to 4 years of secondary education. It turned out to be the best decision we've ever made, because providing all kids in town with these supports, on the one hand, raised the total productivity of the American labor force so much that that single decision, when it spread nationally, accounts for most of American economic growth throughout the 20th century, and it leveled the playing field. Now, I'm not trying to say, please don't misunderstand me, that the high school, or maybe even any educational reform, is the solution to our problems now. I'm trying to say the process by which we got there was by ordinary folks in ordinary towns where they were meeting face to face, and where they weren't, there was a lot of public division then. I'm talking about 1900, 1910, big political turmoil, but people in face-to-face communities were able to put that aside and say, okay, let that noise go on. How can we fix things here? My hope, actually, that we could begin as a country to turn this around is that as I go around the country talking to people, and especially in local communities, there's at the grassroots, a lot of hope that things can begin to happen. Now, will all the problems be completely solved at the local level? Absolutely not. We're going to need, at some point, there are going to be some successes that come out of that period of new experimentation, and then we're going to say, well, okay, that turns out to be really great, and let's do that every place. So I'm not saying that all these problems in the end are going to be solved at the national level, at the local level, without national policies, but I am saying that that's where I think I would look for opportunities for making real progress, a little bit outside to use language I used earlier, to look for purple solutions to this problem, not just red or blue solutions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.